If you want to turn in chapter 24 to the book of Exodus, that's where we left off last week, and that's where we will begin this week. In chapters 20 through 34, we said, God starts to show his holiness side. In the first 19 chapters, of course, we saw the 10 plagues, we saw the Red Sea split, we saw the Egyptian army destroyed, we saw God's mighty power. And then after his mighty delivering power, God turns his attention to the Israelites as they're walking through the wilderness on the way to the promised land. And God says, okay, now I'm going to show you a different side of myself. Now you get to see my caring and nurturing and my providing side. And so God provides them water twice. He provides them food. He gives them protection. And the people are kind of grumbly. They're not sure if they can trust this God or not. They've seen him destroy things and people, and they know he's strong, and they know he's mighty, and they know he's the invincible warrior. But they've never really seen his caring, nurturing side. And so he takes them out in the wilderness, and they say, they start to grumble. We're thirsty. There's no water out here. Why'd you bring us just out here to die of thirst in the wilderness? And so God provides them water. And then they're walking along, and they have no food, and they start to grumble and complain again. We had all we could eat in Egypt. We sat by the meat pots, and we had plenty of vegetables, and we had pancakes every morning, and it was really great. But out here in the wilderness, we have nothing to eat. And so that evening, God brings in quail, massive amounts of quail for them to eat, enough to feed 2 million people plus worth of quail, and they all had their fill of meat. And in the morning, they got up, and all over the ground, there's a stuff, whatever it is. What is it? In fact, they looked at it, and they said, let's call this, I don't know what we call this stuff. What is it? Yeah, there you go. Let's call it, what is it? It's manna. It's what is it? And so they start walking around and putting this what is it in baskets. And they had all this bread, I guess is what they called it, to eat. Wouldn't you love to be able to taste a sample of what is it? I just always thought that would be fascinating. You know what I would like to do, and this is my weird side coming out, I guess. I would love for somebody to do a nutritional analysis of God's homemade what is it. I'll bet that was the most nutrition-packed, amazingly healthy food ever. I'll bet it was, because that's what he gave them to eat for a long, 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 long time out in the wilderness. And you can't just eat crackers in the wilderness and expect to be healthy. So I'll bet this was really amazing stuff. It says it tastes like seed and like it was sweetened with honey. That's kind of about the only description the Bible gives. Other than they walked out every morning, boom, there it was all over the ground. And out, again, I don't know if they had to kind of peel it off the leaves of the weeds and the grass or not, or if it was just kind of sitting there like little, wafers or crackers or whatever. Maybe it was individually wrapped and they had to open the plastic. Maybe not that, I don't know. But whatever it was, they went out every morning, and sure enough, God provided this what is it all over the ground, and they had enough to eat. And then God gives them water again by striking the rock, and he provides them protection from the surrounding armies that try to destroy them. And God's really super-duper patient with the Israelites because they're just getting to know who he is, and they're just starting to come together and kind of reintroduce themselves to each other. Then we get to chapter 20, which is where 24 is where we ended up. But chapters 20 through 34 is the section that we ended with last week. In the first four chapters, God gives a summary of the covenant law. In chapter 24, the people ratify the covenant. The next section talks about God's living arrangements. And finally, up through 34, they reinstitute the covenant. So in the first four chapters, I said chapters 20 through 23, we see a whole bunch of laws. It's kind of like I described it here as a mini Deuteronomy. It's the first giving of the law. God comes to the people and says, do you want to have this covenant with me? And the people say, yes, we want to have a covenant with you. We've seen what you could do. We know how you can provide. We want you to be our God, and we want to be your people. God says, fine, that's great. That's just what I want to hear. And so in these chapters, God goes through and he says, all right, now here's a little bit of what I require. This cannot be a casual relationship. I want to love you, and I want you to love me, and I want us to be together. And the whole purpose of this is so that I can come down and be your God, and I can live with you, and we can be together, and we can have this really close relationship that I've never had with any other nation on the planet, ever in human history. And I want that to be you. But this can't be a casual relationship. I am a holy God, and you are a non-holy people. And I have some requirements to make it possible for us to even live together. And so he lists out several of those requirements as he gives the law in chapters 20 through 23. He covers a whole bunch of different topics here. Again, we're not going to go through them. I encouraged you last week to read through those on your own if you wanted, but we're not going to go through them in class. But idols and altars, the treatment of servants and slaves, personal restitution between between people, property rights as the people live, social rules that they are to live by, Sabbath laws, the festivals they're to keep. All these things are to keep them holy before God and to remind them of who God is. Also, how to live with each other so that the other nations can look at their structure of society and the way they behave and say, wow, something is different about you guys. You have a way better system of behavior than what we do. I mean, we kill each other and we steal each other's stuff and we hate each other and all this kind of thing. But you guys care for each other and you get along really well. You're very orderly. You're very conscientious of other people. How did you develop this system? Where does this come from? Why are you like this? And then people can say, well, actually, let me tell you about our God, because he's really the one who put all this together. And this is kind of a reflection of what he is. See, God is really caring, and he's really loving, and he provides, and he's conscientious, and he loves other people, and that's just who he is. And their job is to be a reflection of who God is through these laws that he gives. And so it allows the people to get close to God because they're not as sinful. Obviously, everybody's sinful, but they're not as wicked, and it allows them to be an example to the other nations of who God is by the way they behave. So God presents to them all these laws and rules, and they get to the end of these, and God presents this to them, and it's the people's choice. Do they accept or do they not? Do they ratify the covenant or do they reject it? And that's where we pick up back in chapter 24. Chapter 24, God says to Moses, this is in verse 1, he says, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, worship from afar, and Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come too near, and the people shall not come up to him." Kind of a graduated approaching here. Moses can come really close, and the leaders a little bit not quite as close, and the people have to stay back there. But verse 3, Moses came and he told the people all the words of the Lord and all of the rules that we saw in chapters 20 through 23. And all the people answered with one voice and said, what? This is where we kind of left off last week. They said, "We will obey. We want to do these things. We want God to be our God, and we want to be his people. We would like to sign our names on the dotted line of the contract, of the covenant, and we want to sign up for this." Verse 4, and so Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord that we just read through, and didn't read through, that we talked about in chapters 20 through 23. And he rose early in the morning, verse 4, and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood, and he put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." Is that a good response or a bad response? When I was up in 400, we'd take thumb votes, wouldn't we? We would say, if you think that's a good response, hold up your thumb like this. If it's a bad response, put your thumb down like this. That way people didn't actually have to speak. So is that a good response or a bad response? I think that's a pretty good response. So far, so good. We will be obedient. Verse 8, and Moses took the blood and he threw it on the people. And he said, "Behold the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God, and they ate and they drank. And there's kind of three parts of the ratifying of this covenant going on, isn't there? The altar and the people. And Moses, he reads the words of the covenant to the people. There's the reading of the law, God's word to them. And they take the blood and they make the sacrifices. And he says, half the blood he took and he put it up against the altar over here. And after he reads all of the words of the covenant to the people, and the people say, "Yes, we will obey," he takes the other half and he throws it on the people. I imagine probably like sprinkles it or kind of flings it all over the place. Kind of a weird situation we don't super well relate to, do we? I guess people were just kind of weird back then, and they just did bizarre stuff, and we don't really understand it. But again, the idea kind of is that here's the sacrifice. Half of the blood goes to God at his altar, and half of the blood goes to you. And whoever breaks the covenant, there's this blood between us, and there will be consequence. God always keeps his half. God will be faithful to the covenant. But now I'm going to sprinkle this all over you. And as you see the blood, think, "Ooh, this is a serious thing." And if we break this, our blood be on our own heads, to borrow another phrase from Scripture elsewhere. This will be our responsibility. And so this is a two-way conditional covenant agreement between God and his people. God has some of the blood on him. People have some of the blood on them, and it's both sides have a responsibility. So the blood is one factor of the ratifying of the covenant. Another was the meal, isn't it? The people ate, or at least the representative leaders of the people, they went up and they had a meal with God. They had can you call it a business dinner? Almost, kind of, but it's more personal than that. A get-together fellowship meal where they went up and they had supper with God. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being one of the leaders of the people and they go up and they see God and they have supper with him? Sitting there in his presence, seeing his glory. It describes just a little bit of what it looked like, but not very much. But being invited to God's place for supper. Can you imagine what that would be like? But they accept this and they have this fellowship now because they're eating together. Again, eating in their times and ours as well. You go over to someone's house and you have fellowship with them. Usually what do? In some way, shape, or form, you what? You eat something, whether you're going there for supper or you just have snacks or going over to their house for New Year's to watch the ball drop. You always have snacks. You go down to the FLC for game night, you always have snacks. It's like some kind of weird, bizarre, calorie-rich rule that we have. Whenever you get together with somebody to have some kind of fellowship and interaction, there's almost always some kind of food involved. That's just how we are. And so God invites them up to his place for a meal, and that's part of the ratification. And also, again, the law itself. Moses read God's word to them. He brought the tablets down to them. There's a reminder of what God's covenant is to the people, and they accept the reading of the law, and they say, yes, we will abide by this. And so in these three ways, the blood, the meal, and the tablets, the people come together and they ratify this brand new covenant that God has made with them. This very relational. It's strict in the sense of the rules, and it's scary because of God's holiness, but it's very personal because this is how God gets to come down and meet his people. Jeremiah in chapter 31, verses 31 through 34, talks about not this covenant, but a new covenant that someday God will make with the people as well. And I want to read this to you quick. It says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah." The old one is the one that we just read about in Exodus. But he says, someday I'm going to come and make a new covenant with you as well. He says, "Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when they took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt," the one that we just read about. "My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord." And he starts to introduce this very close relationship he's trying to develop with them. This is more than just a contract. This is a relationship covenant. He says it's almost like a husband and wife marriage contract. He says, "I was a husband to them." Verse 33, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord." He says, "I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts." I won't write it on stone tablets and in scrolls and stuff at that point. He says, "I will be in them, and I will write it on their hearts themselves. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people." We'll be close the way that I want to be with the people. "And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord.' Why? For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." And as wonderful as the contract is in Exodus, it had a flaw, and the flaw was that the people are flawed and they couldn't keep the covenant. So God says, someday I will come back with an even better covenant to give to the people. And I'll be in their hearts, and I'll write my laws there, and it will be wonderful, and I'll be close, and I will be with them. That's what the new covenant will be like. When was the new covenant ratified? I will tell you when it was ratified. It is ratified in the Gospels. Specifically, I'll read to you this morning from Luke chapter 22, right? And the disciples and Jesus are up in the upper room just before he's crucified. And verse 17 of chapter 22, "He took a cup, and he said, 'Take this, divide it among yourselves, for I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom comes.' And he took the bread when he had given thanks, and he broke it, and he gave them, saying, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' And likewise the cup after they'd eaten, saying, This cup is poured out for you is the new covenant, the New Testament, I think some translations say, but the new covenant in my blood. He says, I'm making a new covenant with you now. Jeremiah told you this new one was coming. And here it is. And we are sitting here today, and we're going to institute and we're going to ratify the new covenant. And how did they do it? They had the living word right with them. They didn't have tablets anymore written on their hearts, but they're sitting with the living word. And he brings out two things at this meal, doesn't he? He brings out the meal, the bread, his body, symbolically, that was broken for them. And they took the wine, symbolically of the blood that he was to shed for them. Three components of the ratification, wasn't it? The law, the meal, and the blood. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Where have we seen that ratification symbol before? Back in Exodus. He's doing the same thing over again. But instead of oxen blood, it's his own blood. And instead of just a meal, it's symbolic now of his flesh. And the wine that they drink is the blood that was sprinkled on the people. And we see his new covenant being instituted there. And every so often, back in the law, the people of Israel were required to repeat this process, this Passover meal, once a year. And in the New Testament, God instructs us to repeat it periodically as well, isn't it? That's what we call the ordinance of communion. You're right. And we repeat this ratification of the covenant every time we take the communion. And we re-ratify it all over again, don't we? Because we think about and we reread his word, we ingest the blood, and we eat the meal, just like Jesus did with his disciples, and just like God instituted it back in the day with the children of Israel in the wilderness here. And so every time we take this, just remember what we're doing. We're reinstituting his new covenant with ourselves. We're saying, I reaffirm this covenant that I have agreed to with you. I trust you as my Savior. I come to you to have you forgive my sins, and I want to be close to you. And just like Jeremiah said, he said, I want to be their husband. What we're doing when we're taking this is, it's almost like, have you ever heard of married couples renewing their vows, 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever years after they're married? They're no less married before they renew them, and they're no more married afterwards. Either way, they're married. But they renew the vows every so often to say, I reaffirm to you and to remind myself, and in the presence of everyone else, I recommit myself to this covenant with you. I'm renewing my vows to you to let you know that I'm still committed to you, and to show everybody else that I'm still committed to this marriage and to you. And that's why I want to renew the vows. And that's exactly what we're doing with communion. We're coming to God and we're saying, in the same way that you ratified back in Exodus, in the same way that you ratified with your disciples in the New Testament, I am reconfirming my vows, my marriage vows with you, to you, my heavenly spouse, who one day we will formally be married when we go up, when we have the marriage supper with the Lamb up in heaven. But right now, I'm renewing my vows with you, and here's how I do it, in the same way that you always do it, with the reading of the Word, with the eating of the meal, and with the sprinkling of the blood. I started reading this chapter saying they're just kind of weird and they do things back then that we don't do today, but really things haven't changed all that much, have they? We do things the exact same way. And this very morning, we get a chance to renew that covenant once again. And so as you eat the bread and you drink the cup, thinking, this is my renewal of my wedding vows to my heavenly bridegroom. That's what I'm doing. I'm saying I'm still committed to you, and I still want to be in this covenant relationship with you. I haven't forgotten, and I want everybody around to see that I'm still interested in you, and I still want to be with you. Pretty good timing for this passage today, isn't it? That works out pretty well. I'm glad I saved it for this week. Yeah, I almost tried to cover it last week. Glad I didn't. So you have a chance this morning to renew your vows with your heavenly bridegroom in the same way that God did with the people of Israel back in Exodus. And so the people ratify the covenant back then, and they reaffirm, we want to obey, we want to do this. And by these three things, the blood and the eating of the meal, and the receiving and the reviewing of the tablets and requirements, they sign their name on the dotted line. They sign the marriage certificate between themselves and their God. And they say, we want to be his people, and we want to be close to him. And that's a good thing, and that's exactly what should have happened. Well, once a couple gets together and they are not dissolved, was the word I'm trying to think, they're committed in holy matrimony, what's the natural thing to do? Try to figure out how to move in together, right? And so in chapter 25 of Exodus, that's what starts to happen. The Lord says to Moses, "Speak to the people and take from me a contribution." And they give a whole list of things to contribute. But in verse 8, he says, here's the whole point. He says, "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may," what? "Dwell in their midst." Again, we are a covenant. We're bound by covenant now. We are husband and wife now. We are married. We are committed to each other through the covenant that you just signed. And it only makes sense now that I want to come to live with you, and you can come to see me, and I can be there with you, and we'll be really, really close. "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and all of its furniture, you shall make it." And the next couple chapters, chapters 25 through 31, give excruciating detail about how God wants his house to be so that the people can come and visit him at his house. It talks about the Ark of the Covenant, how it's to be built and how it's to design, and the exact measurements and what it's to be made out of. Then he moves on to the tables that are to be in there, the table for the showbread. And it talks about the lampstand. It talks about the tabernacle construction itself, what it's to be made of, what color it is, how it's supposed to be woven, the height and the spacing of the pillars going around in amazing detail. He talks about the altar that's to be constructed. It's about the courtyard. It's about the oil that's to be prepared to set before him, the priestly garments that they're to wear, the incense, the wash basin, all these different things. The God designates and he specifies, this is how my place is supposed to look. This is how my house is to be built so that you can come and visit me. In fact, let's see, where is it? God even specifies who is to be in charge of the construction, doesn't he? In chapter 31, he says, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, to build some of the stuff." He says, verse 6, "And behold, I have appointed with him Oholiab, the son of somebody of the tribe of Dan. And I have given to all men ability that they may make all that I have commanded you." God says, here's exactly how my place is to be built. Here's exactly who I want to build it. I've given them special talents and abilities to construct this just the way that I told them to. And God gets really, really specific about how he wants his house to look. Have you ever heard or seen, or maybe it was you, a couple gets married and they find a house or an apartment, they move in, and what do they start to do? What do they start to do? Well, I think this wall would look better if it was more of a green instead of the gray that is there. And here's the couch I'd like to go with it because it kind of matches the wall. And we got to have this kind of carpet so it'll match the wall and the couch and everything will kind of go together. And in the kitchen, I want these kind of plates because the cabinets are that color. So I want it to have this kind of pattern so that it corresponds with the wallpaper that's over here on this wall. And I want the linoleum just like this and the tile over here. And I want the bedroom to look like this, and the other room just like that, and the bathroom and the floor plan, and here's the furniture I want, and this table should be dark because of this trim, and that table should be light because that's painted. And they go through in what? Excruciating detail, figuring out exactly how the house should look. Why? Why do they do all this? Why did God do all this? Because that's where they're going to live, and they want it to be just the way they want it to look. And that's what God is doing with his people. God says, this is the house you're going to come and visit me in. This is where we will spend time together. And I want it to look just a very specific way. In fact, if you're, what's the word they use today? I don't even remember. If you're a really fancy couple, you're going to want some of these items to be designer items, aren't you? Designed by some famous whoever it is that designs these fancy things. And God does the same way. He says, I want these to be designer items. I want this specific guy to design this. I want that specific guy to be in charge of executing that. These are the people that I've assigned to build my house where you can come and meet with me and we can spend time together. I as your God and you as my people, me as the husband and you as my wife, my bride, and we can come and spend time there together. And so he goes through all this detail that we kind of see as boring, but as God setting up his house where he can meet his people. And yes, by the way, there is a lot of symbolism there about holiness and sacrifice and what it says about God and justification and substitutionary atonement and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to downplay all that either, but I also don't want to overlook what it means in the grander picture, because that's what this class is, isn't it? The grander picture of this is how we get to be together and spend time together and become close. And in the end of chapter 31, we get to verse 18. He says, "And he gave to Moses, and when he had finished speaking with him on the Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, the tablets of stone, written with the finger of God." God writes all this stuff down that he talks to the people about, through Moses. And God cuts out, he provides for him 2 tablets of stone. And he himself writes down, he engraves all these things on this tablets of stone for Moses to take to the people as a reminder of what he had said to them. How are we doing so far? Things working out pretty well between God and his people? So far, so good? Thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you say? If you can't, sorry, if you're watching on internet, you can't see. We got a lot of thumbs up there. Okay, that's good. The people are ready to get close to their God, but there's a problem, isn't there? There is a problem. The problem is chapter 32. What happens in chapter 32? Ah, yes, we know the story, don't we? Moses is still in the process of getting the law, but down back at the ranch, down at the base of the mountain, the people are getting restless. What happened to this guy Moses? This God, he's kind of scary, and he's kind of loud, and he's rumbly, and we know he can really, really devastate people when he wants to. Maybe Moses said something wrong, and God just took him out, and we're never going to hear from him again. What do we do? Now maybe God's mad at us. I don't know. We don't know what happened, but it's been over a month now, and he's been gone a long time. What do we do? So they go to the only leader they have down there, who is Aaron. They say, "Aaron, we got to do something. We don't know what's going on." So Aaron says, "I got a good idea. Why don't you all take off an earring? You all contribute like a half a shekel of gold. You bring it to me, and we'll figure something out." And so they make what? A golden calf. Oh, this is a problem. The ink isn't even dry on the covenant yet, metaphorically speaking. There's still, if you want to put it in these terms, they're still at the reception of the wedding, and they're already trying to cheat on God. Can you imagine that, going to a wedding, sitting there during the reception, you haven't even cut the cake yet, and news comes that the bride has cheated on the husband already. And you say, "Well, that didn't take long, did it? This is going to be an exciting reception. Let's see what happens next." What a sad situation. But they've just signed the covenant, and already here they go. So verse 7 of chapter 32, God says, "Look, these people, they're down there, they're up to no good." He says, this can't continue. This is not okay. Before, when they grumbled and complained against me, I took it very easy on them. We were getting acquainted. There was no formal arrangement. Now they know what I expect. Now they've entered into this relationship. They've signed up for the contract. There is a covenant between us now. I cannot allow this to continue. You agreed to the covenant, and already you're breaking it. Verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Have you ever heard of parents talk about their kids? When the kid is doing something great, they say, "That's my boy, that's my girl." But when the kid is behaving badly and they're being obnoxious and loud and stupid and they're disobedient, what do they say? They look at their spouse and they say, That's your kid. What's your kid doing now?" And I get a chuckle out of this reading through this passage. That's exactly what God and Moses are doing here. God says to Moses, "Go down, because your people who you brought up out of the land of Egypt, they've corrupted themselves already. They've turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They've made for themselves a golden calf, and they've worshipped and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" And the Lord says to Moses, "I've seen this people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I might make a great nation out of you. Step aside, Moses. I'm going to fry them like bacon. I'm going to wipe them out, and I will make a nation out of you instead of them." He said, "We've just made this covenant with them. You haven't even brought them the tablets yet. Already they've broken them." Verse 11, "But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people?'" Not my people, God. These are your people. I don't want to take credit for these guys. Why are you mad at these people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'With evil intent he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. And it sounds almost superficial, like God is just kind of losing his temper. He says, fine, I'm just going to wipe them all out. And the brilliant, golden-tongued orator, who is Moses, talks God off of the ledge, talks him out of doing something rash that he will regret. And Moses is the voice of reason to an unruly God, and he talks them out of doing something terrible. It almost kind of sounds like that on the surface, doesn't it? That's not what's going on here. First of all, God does not just throw fits and do things he regrets. And Moses is not a golden-tongued orator. Remember at the bush, he says, I'm slow of speech, I can't even talk very well. So that's not what's going on here. But Moses he's reiterating, not that God forgot, but he's saying, look, God, you have a covenant with these people. You cannot destroy them because you made an unconditional promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. You cannot destroy these people because your covenant with them is unconditional. They have to be your people. Based on your word, based on your character, based on your covenant, you cannot destroy them. You have to work with them. And so as flattered as I am that you would like to make me a great nation, and that'd be really cool and stuff, but think of what the other nations will see if you destroy them. They say, well, God couldn't protect them and he just had to wipe them out. But they'll see that you are not a covenant-keeping God the way that you said you were, but you are. You have to maintain your covenant with his people. And that's what Moses said to God. And again, God didn't forget that. I don't know if he wanted Moses to kind of remind himself that this is the situation, or if they're still kind of doing a little bit of this wordplay where God says, he's kind of just expressing his frustration. And people kind of cringe at that a little bit, but God has personality every bit as much as we do. He gets frustrated and angry just like we do. We are in his image. And as I said before, we can see through this passage how they're kind of wordplaying back and forth, and it's kind of fun to see in a weird kind of way how God says to Moses, these are your people. Moses says, no, those are your people. And God says, step out of the way, I'm going to just wipe them out. It's almost like God is kind of venting to Moses a little bit. We can see his personality coming out in a very, very relatable way to us. And so Moses said, no, you have a covenant with these people. You have to maintain that covenant. You bound yourself by your word that you would make these people a great nation. You'd give them the land. You'd do all the things for them. And so God says, yes, you are correct. And that's what I will do. But Moses goes down the mountain, and he sees the people, and he hears the people, and he takes these tablets. Verse 15, Moses went and he turned and he went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, the tablets that were written on both sides. Just a little side point, not a big deal, but we always see the pictures or the statues, the memorials, the 10 Commandments, and there's kind of two halves to it, and the first 5 commandments are on this side, and the last 5 commandments are on this side. According to this, it says tablets, plural, but they were hand-hewn, handwritten, or engraved, whatever you want to call it, by God, written on both sides. Boy, I would love to see these things. Again, not a huge point, but can you imagine if we could see these things today? What would they be like? I picture them. They're like dark green polished marble, right? They're about this big, so they're not too super heavy. They don't have to be thick. They can be kind of light and portable, but they are engraved by God in about a size 11 or 12 font, right? I'm trying to figure out what font God would have done it. We see old pictures that, the hand scrawled, the chisel and hammer and stuff. God doesn't have to use hammer and chisel. He can laser engrave these things with unbelievable precision. He can write them in microscopic font if he wants. Did you know that? Before they had laser engravers whatsoever, God can go and write them all out. Whatever it was, he wrote these things out, double-sided. He could have written the entirety of chapters 20, what chapters was it? 20 through 23. The entirety of it on 2 sides on a very carryable set of tablets for Moses to carry down. My personal opinion, I cannot support this. I think that's probably what he did. And probably by the letters were gold-leafed engraved, by the way. That's how I picture this, okay? I don't know if any of that's true or not. I do know they're double-sided. I know God did it. I know Moses carried them down. That's all I know. But in my mind, this is what I'm saying, so that's what I'll let you see too, okay? Dark green marble tablets, gold embossed letters, super fine 10 or 11 or 12 size font, laser engraved. That's what he's carrying down the mountain, okay? And he comes down to the people carrying these things. The tablets, verse 16, were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Why does he go into this? Why does he keep repeating himself? There's always a reason when he does this. And when Joshua heard, they say, hey, I hear a party going on. There's war. No, he says there's war. And Moses said, I don't think that's war. They're singing. They're having a party. As soon as he came near the camp, verse 19, he saw the calf and the dancing. Moses, in anger, burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And Moses comes down, and he's on a precipice overlooking the people. And he sees what's going on, and he screams, and he takes the tablets, and he shoves them over the cliff, and they fall down, and right in front of the people, they shatter into 1,000 pieces. Again, did Moses just have a fit, and he lost his temper? He just couldn't, he just had rage, and he flipped out, and he starts Hulk smashing whatever he can smash? I don't think it's just that. What is Moses saying? He said, look, God just gave us this covenant, and already you have what? You shattered it on the rocks. Just like this covenant, we're smashing it on the rocks. That's how you've just destroyed the covenant that you just signed. You just signed this. What is wrong with you people? And so he takes this, verse 20. He took the calf that they had made, and he burned it with fire, and he ground it to powder, and he scattered it on the water, and he made the people of Israel drink it. And I can just picture him doing this. He has somebody grind it up, and he throws it in the water. He says, now you people get down and drink this. Kind of like, I don't know what it's like, almost, the stereotypical kid, the parent has to wash his mouth out with soap or something like that. He says, you want a golden calf? Here you go. You drink it. And he takes some of the people and he shoves their face in the water. He says, drink this, you blockhead, you moron. Drink this. Bloop. Drink this. Bloop. Drink this. Bloop. And he sticks their heads under the water. He makes them drink this gritty, gross stuff. He says, you want your calf? You want an idol? Here you go. You drink it. You people, I can't stand you people, he says. He turns to Aaron. He says, what have you been doing? And Moses turns to Aaron. Did I say that wrong? Moses turns to Aaron. He says, what are you doing? And Aaron comes up with a story about how, I just had some gold and the calf kind of popped out. And so we just kind of started singing to it. And this is the high priest, right? Yeah, good. That's great. That's what we like to see. Verse 25, and when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies. He made them look like idiots to everybody around. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who's on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the Levites gathered around him, those of his own tribe. And he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you. Go to and from the gate throughout the camp, each of you, and kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. Take your sword and just start slicing people down. These people need a wake-up call. It's time for some punishment. Just start hacking people. Walk through the camp, left and right, just start hacking guys. Verse 28, and the sons of Levi did according to the words of Moses. And that day, about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, today you've been ordained for the service of the Lord, Levites, because you did this. Each one at the cost of his son and his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day. Verse 31, so Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people has sinned a great sin, and they've made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you've written. The Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But go now, you lead the people to a place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And before, we didn't see any punishment for their grumbling and their disobedience and their lack of faith. But now they've signed the covenant. Now they're in an agreement. Now they're in a relationship. Now their disobedience and their rebellion has a little bit more weight to it, doesn't it? And God says, you can't keep doing this. We have a covenant. We have a relationship. I cannot allow my bride to behave in this way. I have to punish you. And so we start with the punishments for the disobedience. And we're starting to set up a cycle that we'll see far too many times here throughout the Old Testament. Disobedience, punishment, but then God brings mercy. He doesn't destroy them. He still kind of goes, well, let me read it to yourself. He's still with them. Verse 3 of chapter 33, he says, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. If I stick around and I be with you, I'm just going to end up wiping you out. I'll send one of my subordinate angels to lead you along, but I don't want to be there. You're too wicked for me. I can't stand you. Well, they continue on here. Skip down to verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you've not let me know who you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. God, you've told this to me personally. Verse 13, now therefore, if I found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And God said, okay, my presence will go before you, and I will give you rest. And Moses, said, if your presence will not go with me, don't bring us up from here. If you're not going to go with us personally, just leave us here. We need you to be with us. Verse 16, for how shall it be known that I found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, and I and your people from every other people on the face of the earth? God, you being with us, and you being close to us, and you being our God, that's the only thing that sets us apart from every other nation. You have said that we're your people. Moses said, you've said that I've gained your favor. Please, you have to go with us, or else we are no different from any group on the face of the earth. You are the only thing that makes us different. Please, you have to go with us. Verse 17, the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken I will do for you. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. So there's punishment, there's mercy, and now there is renewal. God says, fine, I will stay with you because I know you and I know you by name. So Moses begs God to personally accompany Israel on their journey. And God does agree, but it's only for Moses' sake. But he says, okay, well, they've broken my covenant. We've had some punishment. I'll show mercy on them. I'll stay with you because you asked me to, Moses, but I will do it. Chapter 34 then. In chapter 34, they make a new set of tablets to, again, not only physically but symbolically, they are again renewing the covenant. God reissues the tablets to them. Moses has to provide his own tablets this time, but God still engraves them, and he sends them back down. In verse 27 of chapter 34, the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate or drank water, and he wrote on the tablets the word of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. So we see this pattern here, the disobedience, the punishment, God having mercy, and he renews the covenant with them. But now the covenant has been renewed and they can move on. So they've got the temple instructions, or the tabernacle, I should say, instructions. They've signed the covenant, so what do you do next? Well, next is to put all of those design plans into place. If God really is to move in with his people, now they have to build the house, don't they? So they have a place to be together. So, in chapters 30 through 35, we see the implementation of all the instructions that we saw earlier. And so they start building the tabernacle. They bring all the stuff. They start building it. These two guys kind of take charge. They oversee all the craftsmen. They probably do some of the work themselves. It goes again into excruciating detail of how they put all these things together. The ark, the temple, the lampstand, the table, the altar of the incense, all the different things. And they continue to construct these things. And again, I won't read through all those. You can read through that if you wish to. But they follow the instructions. And down in chapters 39 and 40, we start to see how they're doing. And I think this is the point that we want to pull out here. Chapter 39, verse 1. From the blue and purple and scarlet yarns, they made finely woven garments for ministering in the holy place. They made the holy garments for Aaron. Next phrase. As the Lord had commanded Moses. They're following the directions. That's good for them. Verse 3, and they hammered out the gold leaf, and he cut it into threads, blah, 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 blah. And they did all the stuff. Verse 5, fine linen, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 7, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 21, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 26, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 29, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 30, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Verse 32, thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the people of Israel did according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. They keep following Moses' commands, which are God's commands, through Moses. Verse 42 of the same chapter, chapter 39, according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so the people of Israel had done all the work. And Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it. As the Lord commanded Moses, so had they done it. Then Moses blessed them. Finally, they're back on the right path, and they're following God's commands. They're setting up God's house the way that he wants us to be. Chapter 40, verse 16, this Moses did, according to all that the Lord had commanded him, so he did. Are you starting to pick up on the pattern here? Verse 17, in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. Verse 19, they continued to put stuff in place as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 23, as the Lord commanded Moses. 25, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 27, as the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 29, as the Lord commanded Moses. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Yes, they're doing very well. Finally, verse 32, as the Lord commanded Moses. So they erected the court around the tabernacle and the altar. They set up the screen at the gate of the court. So Moses finished the work. And they did all these things just like they were supposed to, as the Lord commanded Moses. And now God's house is built. Like with any couple, what do? They've chosen the furniture and the wall hangings and the way they lay out of the house. They put everything together. It's all there. What's left to do? What is there? What does the couple do after they're married and they have their house finally set up, they bought the furniture and stuff, finally they what? Thank you. They move in, don't they? And we conclude the book in chapter 40. It says, then the cloud of the tent of the meeting, cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of the meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up over the tabernacle, the people would set out. And if the cloud was not taken up, they did not set out till the day it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all of their journeys. And God is living with his people. But God, in his glory, he comes down to the tabernacle. And there they are. Moses finished all the work, and you have the people, and you have God. And what happens? They're no longer as separated as they used to be. And God moves into his tabernacle, doesn't he? And now God has a house right alongside of all of his people. There's the Levites' tents and the Judah's tents and Issachar's tents and Zebulun's tents, and there's God's tent right there in the middle, the biggest one, and it's glorious, and he's living there, and God is living with his people. And we look at this and we say, yeah, the marriage is complete, and now they're living together. Is that not the objective that God said he wanted to accomplish? Yes, it is. How are things going for the people? Pretty good. I think it's working really well. And that concludes the book of Exodus. But before we dismiss in like 1 minute, let's take one quick reevaluation of the other covenant we've been keeping track of. This one right here. How are we doing with the covenant so far? The land. How about the land? Do we have the land? Well, we're kind of on the way, aren't we? But we're still walking around in the wilderness. We're not quite there yet. How about the seed? How about the ultimate leader that God had promised? Do we have a leader? Do we have a leader? We have a guy who's rescued them out of Egypt. He has delivered the law to them. He's instituted a sacrificial system which can cover their sins. He's brought God to live with his people. Now the people are living with God, and they're in this relationship. Does that sound like a good leader to you? Well, let's keep this one in the back of our mind. We have Moses. He's pretty good. Maybe he will turn out to be the ultimate leader that God promised. We'll have to see. But for now, he's looking pretty good, isn't he? How about the nation? Do we have a nation? Oh, we have a nation. They are now a nation. They are a people. Part one of God's promise is completed. He did just what he said. He's turned them into a nation. They're a separate people. They have their own laws. They have their own king / husband / God. He is with them. He's leading them. They are now a nation. So, although God has not yet provided the land, or maybe, I should have put, the ultimate seed, we'll see how Moses turns out. He has made Israel a nation, just as he said, and he has just begun to prove to Israel that he really is their all-powerful, promise-keeping God, Yahweh. And you remember back at the beginning of the book when God just introduces himself to Moses. He says, you guys have never known me by this name yet, but I'm going to make this name known to you. And even though they said the name before, they'd never seen that part of his character. Well, guess what? Just like he said, now they have. Now they know that he is not only all-powerful, self-existent, invincible God, but he's also the promise-keeping, caring, loving, nurturing, kind, merciful God that he revealed himself to Abraham as, and now he's kept his promises.